Landlord Tenant Rights California. Man, it can feel pretty overwhelming keeping up with all these laws, especially as a renter, you know? If you've ever felt like you're just wading through a sea of legal jargon when it comes to your lease, well, this is the deep dive for you.
Yeah, for sure. It can be confusing. We've got a ton of material here to go through. YouTube videos, FAQs, even some official legal documents. Our mission today is to break it all down, make it clear, and help you understand your rights as a tenant here in California in 2025.
It's exactly. We're going to dive deep into the stuff that really matters to you. Security deposits, screening fees, that new thing with positive credit reporting, all the fees landlords can and can't charge. And we're going to zoom in on some of the specific protections you have in places like Los Angeles and Santa Monica. And, just to be clear up front, we're focusing entirely on tenant rights here. You're the renter, you need to know what protects you. And speaking of protection, if you're dealing with an eviction or an unlawful detainer lawsuit, or even worried about the safety of your apartment and you're in Orange County, Riverside, San Diego, or Los Angeles, head over to martinezlawcenter.com for more information.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in. Security deposits, AB 2801. It's a big one. What stands out to you?
Well, I think what's huge is how they really double down on this reasonably necessary standard for deductions. Landlords, they can't just nickel and dime you for every little thing anymore. It's really about getting the unit back in the same condition it was when you moved in, minus the wear and tear that just happens when people live in a place, right?
Right, exactly. The law now says landlords, they can only deduct for cleaning and repairs that are actually needed to make the place look like it did when you first got there. And that includes the cost of materials and labor. And you know what's interesting? Those new photo requirements.
Yeah. Talk about a game changer.
Yeah.
Photographic evidence. That's got to make a difference.
It does. Now, landlords are required to take photos dated and time-stamped right after you move out, before they do any cleaning or repairs. And then they take photos again after the work is done. And here's the kicker. Starting July 1st, 2025, they're going to have to document the condition of the place with photos at the very beginning of your tenancy, too. So there's a clear record to compare.
Makes sense. Hard to argue with a photo, right? And those photos, it's not like they're just for the landlord, are they?
Nope, not at all. If your landlord wants to take anything out of your security deposit, they have to give you copies of those photos, and they have to explain in writing exactly why they're making each deduction. No photos, no proof. It really puts the responsibility on the landlord to justify every penny.
So, no more shady deductions without evidence. Love it. Now, what about, everything's digital these days. Can tenants get all this stuff electronically?
They can, actually. But here's the thing. It has to be after the tenancy is over, and both you and the landlord have to agree to it. Then they can email you the accounting and the photos. A little more modern, but it's got to be a mutual decision.
Gotcha. So paper is the default, unless you both agree to go digital later on. Okay. There was also something about an exception for smaller landlords when it comes to the deposit amount, right? What's the deal with that?
Right. So this is actually something that was already in California law, but it's worth mentioning. If a landlord owns just a couple of rental units, or a very small number total, they can charge a bit more for the deposit, like up to 2 months rent for an unfurnished place, or 3 months if it's furnished. But even then, there's a limit. If you're active duty military, they can only ask for 1 month rent as a deposit.
Okay, so even with the new rules, there's still some flexibility for those smaller landlords. Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about application fees. I mean, this is something that can be so frustrating for renters. It seems like AB 2493 tries to fix some of that.
Definitely does. This law is all about fairness in the application process. The big thing for renters is this. Landlords cannot charge you a fee to apply for a place if they know, or should reasonably know, that there's no unit available. So no more paying for the chance to get an apartment that doesn't even exist.
Right. That always felt so wrong, paying for an application when there's no actual vacancy. So if a landlord does have a unit available, what are they supposed to do about application fees?
Basically, they've got two options. Option one, they give you their written rental criteria right when you get the application. If they do that, they have to process applications in the order they receive them. First come, first served. And they have to accept the very first applicant who meets all their requirements.
So if you're the first one who qualifies, they're obligated to rent to you.
Yep, in theory, if they go with that first option. But there's a second option. They can choose not to go with the first qualified person. But if they do that, they got to return the application fee to everyone they didn't choose. And they have to do it quickly, within 7 days of picking a tenant, or 30 days after they got your application, whichever comes first. So it kind of forces them to be efficient and fair.
Yeah, I like that. Either they're totally transparent and pick the first qualified person,
Mm-hmm.
or they got to refund everyone else's money quickly.
Hmm.
Keeps them accountable. Now, what about credit reports? I mean, they pull those when you apply, right?
They do, and this is another place where the law is more on the tenant side now. Landlords, they are required to give you a copy of any credit report they got for your application, and they have to do this within 7 days of getting it themselves. It doesn't matter if they approved you or not, you get to see it.
Yeah.
This way, you know exactly what they saw, and you can challenge anything that's wrong.
Transparency. Gotta love it. Okay, let's talk about building credit with your rent payments. This whole positive credit reporting thing seems like it could be a big deal for renters.
It could be huge. AB 2747 and SB 924, these laws basically say that all landlords, they have to offer tenants the option of reporting their on-time rent payments to at least one credit bureau. So if you pay your rent on time, it can actually help build your credit score. This offer has to go out by April 1st, 2025 to everyone who's already renting, and then it's part of any new lease after that date, and it's got to be offered every year. This could be a real game changer, especially for people who haven't had a chance to build a lot of credit history yet.
So how are landlords supposed to let tenants know about this?
They can send you a notice in the mail, and if they do that, they got to include a self-addressed, stamped envelope so you can easily send back the form. Or they can just email you the offer.
Simple enough.
Yeah.
Is there a cost involved for the tenant, though?
There can be. If you decide you want to do it, if you want your rent payments reported, the landlord can charge a fee, but it's capped at either their actual cost to report it or $10 a month, whichever is less.
Okay, so not free, but not super expensive either, considering it could help you build credit. What if you sign up for it and then, I don't know, miss a rent payment or something?
Well, if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, or if you don't pay that reporting fee for 30 days, the landlord can stop reporting your payments. And if you decide you want back in later, there's a 6-month waiting period before they have to start reporting again.
Good to know. Now, can landlords just take money out of your rent or security deposit to pay for this credit reporting?
Nope, absolutely not. The law is very clear. They cannot use your rent money or your security deposit to cover that. And they can't try to evict you if you don't want to pay for the credit reporting. The only thing they can do is stop reporting your payments. That's it.
Good, good. Now, are all landlords required to offer this? Or are there any exceptions?
There is an exception, yeah. If a landlord owns 14 units or less, they don't have to offer this. But, and this is important, there's a catch. This exception doesn't apply if they own more than one building, and they're structured as a REIT, a corporation, or an LLC with a corporate member. So it's really targeting those bigger, more corporate landlords to make sure they're giving tenants this opportunity.
Makes sense. All right, let's move on to something I think every renter will love. Fees that landlords can't charge anymore.
Yeah, SB 611, this one takes aim at those annoying, sometimes unexpected fees. The most straightforward thing is landlords cannot charge you a fee for serving you with a legal notice. Like if you're behind on rent and they give you a 3-day notice to pay or move out, they can't tack on an extra fee for that.
Hallelujah. Those always felt so predatory. Any other fees that are off limits now?
Yep, they can't charge you a fee just because you pay your rent or security deposit with a personal check. I mean, a lot of people still use checks, so this protects you from getting dinged with an extra charge for using a normal payment method.
Absolutely. Can't believe that was even a thing. Now, I noticed that these protections, they apply to some commercial tenants too, right?
That's right. These specific things, the fees for serving notices and taking checks, they also apply to certain qualified commercial tenants. That means really small businesses, like ones with 5 or fewer employees, no access to loans, restaurants with less than 10 employees, and nonprofits with less than 20. But these commercial tenants, they have to give their landlord a written notice every year that they meet the requirements to be protected.
Interesting. There's some overlap there with the protections for residential renters. Okay, let's talk about something really important. Protections for people experiencing domestic violence.
Right. SB 1051. This is all about keeping tenants safe. If you or a family member or someone else living with you is a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, or trafficking, you have rights. If you give your landlord a written request and you include proof, like a restraining order or a police report, the landlord has to change the locks on your unit.
And who pays for the new locks?
The landlord does. They can't make you pay for it, and they have to do it fast. 24 hours, that's all they have. It shows how serious this is. They got to prioritize your safety.
24 hours, that's not a lot of time. What if the landlord doesn't do it within that window?
Then you can change the locks yourself. You can put in new ones as long as they're the same quality or better. And if you tell the landlord you did it and give them a key to the new locks, all within that same 24 hours, they have to pay you back for the cost of the locks. They have 21 days to do it. This way, your safety isn't on hold just because the landlord is slow.
You're empowered to take action, and the landlord is still held accountable.
I like it. Okay, so California law, it often sets like a rough line, right? But a lot of places, especially in Southern California, have even stronger tenant protections. Let's talk about what's going on in places like Los Angeles and Santa Monica. Yeah, California law is like the foundation, but a lot of cities and counties, especially in areas with tons of renters, they've gone above and beyond with extra protections, and those can make a real difference. Let's start with LA. There's been some interesting stuff happening there.
Okay, what should renters in LA be aware of?
One big thing is substantial remodels. If your building isn't covered by the city's rent stabilization ordinance, traditional rent control, there's a freeze on those big remodels that could push people out of their homes. And there's talk about making that permanent. Plus, there's a new program where landlords of those non-RSO units have to pay a fee for every unit. That money goes toward protecting tenants and enforcing the rules.
So even if a unit isn't traditionally rent controlled, LA's still getting more involved, huh?
Definitely. And here's another thing. If your landlord tries to raise your rent by a certain amount, and that amount is tied to inflation, they have to pay you relocation assistance. So if that rent hike forces you to move, you get some help. And maybe the biggest change is this. LA has basically expanded just cause eviction rules to pretty much all non-RSO properties. So even if you don't have a lease anymore, your landlord can't just kick you out for no reason. They got to have a valid legal reason.
Wow. So even without a lease, you've got more security in LA now. That's big.
Huge change. And one more thing. LA has cracked down hard on tenant harassment. They've got strict rules now, and if a landlord breaks them, they could be on the hook for 3 times the damages. It's a clear message that the city is serious about protecting tenants from bad landlords.
Yeah, triple damages. That'll make them think twice. Okay, let's switch gears to Santa Monica. They've always been known for being pro-tenant. Anything new there?
Always pushing the envelope. One thing that's really interesting, they added housing status as a protected class under their anti-discrimination laws. That's pretty progressive.
Housing status. What exactly does that mean?
It means landlords can't discriminate against you based on your current housing situation. So if you're experiencing homelessness, or you're using a housing assistance program, or you just don't have a long rental history, they can't hold that against you. It's about protecting vulnerable people who need housing. And Santa Monica has also really expanded when you're entitled to relocation assistance. It's not just for those no-fault evictions anymore. Now, if you have to move out temporarily while they fix something, or even if the city finds that you basically had to leave because the landlord was neglecting the place, you could be entitled to relocation help.
It seems like they're trying to stop people from being displaced, no matter the reason.
Exactly. And they've totally overhauled their rules on buyout agreements, when a landlord offers you money to move out. Now, those rules apply to every rental unit in Santa Monica, rent control or not. They've set minimum payouts for buyouts, and those minimums are based on the city's relocation assistance fees. You can negotiate for more, but you can't agree to anything less than that minimum. And landlords, they have to file any buyout agreement with the city, or else you can actually use that as a defense if they try to evict you.
So, no more shady buyout deals. They got to be fair and transparent. Anything else changing in Santa Monica?
Yeah, they've given tenants some new defenses they can use in eviction cases. If a landlord tries to evict you in bad faith, or if they try to hike up the rent too much, you might be able to fight it. Like if they try to raise the rent or evict you within 6 months after trying to evict you for a different reason, or after you complained about something being wrong with the unit, that could be bad faith. They've also made it crystal clear what counts as harassment. Like refusing to take your rent money, or even bugging you with buyout offers after you've said no, especially within 6 months. It's all about protecting tenants.
It's clear both LA and Santa Monica, they're going above and beyond to protect renters. All right, let's zoom out a bit. Let's talk about rent increases and rent control in general, statewide and locally.
Right. So California has that statewide rent cap, AB 1482. It basically limits rent increases to 5% plus inflation, with a hard cap of 10%, whichever is less. But remember, there are exceptions, like small owner-occupied buildings and new construction are exempt. And the really important thing to know is that a lot of cities and counties, like we talked about with LA and Santa Monica, they have their own rent control rules. And those can be even stricter than the state law. So even if your building isn't covered by AB 1482, you might still have some rent control protections.
And didn't unincorporated LA County actually lower their rent increase limit?
They did. In those areas, rent can only go up by 60% of the inflation rate, and the absolute max is 3%. There's a little wiggle room for smaller landlords, those with 10 units or less, but overall, it's tougher on landlords than the state law.
Makes sense. Now, what about those trash hauling rate hikes we've seen in some cities? How does that affect renters indirectly?
Good question. While it's not directly rent control, when those fees go up, like we've seen in places like Oxnard and Pasadena, it can definitely impact renters indirectly. Landlords, they might try to pass those costs along to you if they're allowed to, or they might factor them into future rent increases. So even though it's not a direct change to tenant law, it can hit you in the wallet.
Right. It all adds up. And we saw something about Penal Code 396, price gouging. How does that relate to rent?
So that law basically makes it a crime to jack up prices during a state of emergency. Could be a state, county, or even city level emergency. Now, how it applies to rent specifically can be a bit tricky. It often comes down to legal interpretation. But generally, it means landlords got to be careful about raising rent too much. Anything over 10% is risky during those emergencies. And there's been talk about maybe even considering extreme heat events as emergencies. So rent hikes during heat waves might be a problem. It's another layer of protection for tenants in those tough times.
Gotcha. So it's not just about rent control, but also about price gouging rules. Now, besides all that, what are some other basic tenant rights that people should know about?
Well, the most basic one is your right to a habitable place. Your landlord has to keep the property safe and livable, no major problems. If they don't, you have options. You can do what's called repair and deduct, where you pay for the repairs yourself and take it out of your rent, but there are very specific rules you have to follow for that. You're also protected from retaliation. If you complain about something that's unsafe, your landlord can't punish you for it. And fair housing laws, they protect you from discrimination based on your race, religion, gender, and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, you have the right to be protected from illegal evictions. Your landlord can't just lock you out or toss your stuff without going through the proper legal process. Oh, and one more thing, your landlord has to give you reasonable notice, usually 24 hours. Before entering your unit, unless it's an emergency.
Important stuff. And we're hearing more and more about this right to counsel movement for tenants facing eviction. What's the latest there?
This is a big deal. It's all about trying to even the playing field in eviction cases. The idea is that if you're a low-income tenant facing eviction, you should have a lawyer for free. LA County, they have a program that's doing this right now, but it's only for unincorporated areas. They want to expand it to the whole county by 2030. It's not everywhere yet, but it's gaining traction. Having a lawyer can really change things for tenants.
Absolutely. We also saw some changes related to substandard buildings, right? What's new there?
So SB 1465, it made the definition of a substandard building broader, and it also expanded what counts as a rental unit. Now it might even include places that are being occupied illegally in some cases. This law also says that the city has to do more inspections, and if they order people out of a substandard building, they gotta provide relocation assistance. It's about cracking down on those unsafe and illegal living situations and making sure people aren't left out in the cold.
Right. It's about holding landlords accountable for providing safe housing. Any other random updates we should mention?
Yeah, just a few more. Senate Bill 479, it clarified what natural person means when it comes to owner-occupied housing. This is important if your landlord tries to evict you saying they want to live there themselves, especially if the property is in a trust or owned by some other entity. Assembly Bill 2622, that one raised the price limit for when you need a licensed contractor for repairs, which could mean some repairs take longer to get done. If you get your water from a well, Assembly Bill 2454 now says those wells have to be tested and your landlord has to tell you the results. And this one isn't directly about tenant rights, but Assembly Bill 2533, it aims to make it easier to build those accessory dwelling units, ADUs. That could mean more housing options down the road. And last one, Assembly Bill 2684 says that cities have to think about extreme heat when they're updating their housing plans. So maybe we'll see more rules about cooling in rental properties in the future.
Man, that's a lot to keep track of. It's complicated being a renter in California.
It is, no doubt about it. That's why it's so important to stay informed, know your rights. This deep dive, we've given you the rundown on the big changes for 2025, but every situation is different, and local laws can make things even more complicated.
Absolutely. If you're dealing with a specific problem with your landlord, especially an eviction, an unlawful detainer, or something about safety in your apartment, and you're in Orange County, Riverside, San Diego, or Los Angeles, check out martinezlawcenter.com. They've got resources to help.
Yeah, the information we shared today, it's a starting point. If you need more help, do some research, talk to a lawyer if you need to. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. With all these new laws protecting renters in California, what's going to happen to the rental market? How will this change the relationship between tenants and landlords in the long run? That's the big question.
It really is. Only time will tell.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.